All right, everybody, welcome to day one of kind of a two-parter that I wanted to do. I wanted to split this into two parts just so that it can feel a little bit more congruous, and that I feel like the topics from today and tomorrow would have overlapped much. Just like a part one and a part two of a lecture. We're basically going to take Sinatra and then start applying all the principles from MVC. We're going to talk about RESTful routing, and then we're going to talk about RESTful routing conventions. With all of these principles, we'll get into CRUD, so using Sinatra to build applications that create information, read information, update information, and delete information, right? If we need like a quick review of what MVC is, remember that the user makes a request via the browser, right? The controller decides which what the logic is. It might go request information from the model, and then we will ultimately return a view back to the user, right? So we'll get into all of this again in just a little bit. The first thing that I just wanted to go over really quick, and it's just going to kind of be the actor through which we start the conversation today, is corneal. I believe it was Joshua who posted in the Slack channel asking a question: is it possible to bootstrap Sinatra applications without having to write everything from scratch? And the answer is yes. Jen, I think this is true. Maybe you can verify this for me, but I believe corneal was a gem created by a former Flatiron student. So once you get into the Rails section, which is the next section, you'll see that Rails has a way of bootstrapping an application really fast by just typing something called Rails new. And the person who was in the Sinatra section of the program, I'm imagining, was like, why don't we just have something like this for Sinatra? Why can't we just type in a line of code and then have a script run in the background that compiles, or that creates all the file structures for me? So in the last lecture that we did that you can go back and look at, you can see that I built the application from scratch. And you can follow that method if you want to. It's completely possible, as we've seen, to build a Sinatra application from scratch. However, if you like bootstrapping something, or don't want to spend all the time, you can use something called corneal. I was just having problems with this earlier, but let's see if it works. So you just need to write gem install corneal into your terminal, kind of at any place. It'll install the gem, and then following the instructions here, you just create your app by running corneal new and then app name. So because I was inspired by the 11 hours of Harry Potter that I watched, so we're going to create a spellcasting app, corneal new spellcaster. And then once we go into there, and let's see, hold on, I wanted to do this. Perfect, yes, I love that I can do that. Okay, cool. And then I think there's a question, let's see. Oh yeah, what is it? Oh yeah. Can we change the name after the fact? I mean, it's just a directory, it's just a file name. So you can, however, there are going to be a lot of small kind of pieces inside the application that you'll have to configure. And I'll show that to you right now. So if I open up Atom here, you can see that I have my spellcaster application, and it has all of the files already set up for me. And this is what I was saying before, like, oh, maybe it doesn't do this here. Yeah, I guess it seems pretty, yeah, if you decide to change the name later, there are just a couple small places like here. The beginning HTML has some information for you. Yeah, so once we do this, we can run bundle install. Let's see if this works. Just having trouble with this. Maybe it does just take forever. I don't understand why. But while this runs in the background, let's just take a look at the GitHub repository for this. Yeah, so you'll see that there are a bunch of commands that we can do to kind of speed up our scaffolding or our creating our file trees for us. Once I get this bundle install going, I'll show you how we can run this model, and it will automatically create a migration for us. We can also use special arguments in the model to create our columns and our data types as well. And then later down the line, tomorrow, we'll talk about, yes, there it goes. We'll talk about these controllers and these scaffolding things. These are very, we don't really want you to use these. Resist as long as you possibly can, because they do a lot of work for you that we're going to test to make sure that you understand on a deeper level. Okay, it's almost done. Once it's done running, I'll hit up shotgun, and then you can kind of check out how this all works. Another thing that we're going to be using today that is included in with the kind of Cornell package is something called Tux, and Tux is going to be your console. There was a README about it, I believe, in the curriculum, and you can see that just by simply running Tux in the application directory or the directory of your application, a console will begin, and you can kind of use that to play around with information as well. It doesn't look like Cornell comes with a seed file automatically, but as we saw in the last lecture that I gave, you can definitely add a seed file there. So if I run shotgun, I have a URL here, and here we go. Here is our application. Let's see. I wonder why it's. If I have an application controller right now. Just have a welcome. Okay, great. All right. So in order to kind of help me go through the kind of concepts of RESTful routing that I want to touch on today, a couple of my coworkers and I created this slideshow that goes over kind of what the RESTful routing conventions are. Oh, sorry, I'm a little bit ahead of myself. I don't want to get quite here yet. I'm going to use Cornell model name and then maybe these arguments here to create my first model. And then I'll use Tux to make a couple instances of that model, and then we'll dive into RESTful routing. Okay, so if I just say Cornell model, and we're making spells today, and I wonder if it's plural. I imagine it is. Spells. And then we'll say the name of the spell is a string, and then the description can also be a string. That's fine. So just by typing in this one line of code, if I go look over at my migrations, have a migration that creates the table, and it has the columns and the data types for me. So we no longer have to write our migrations out by hand if we don't want to. And this is something that follows over into Rails as well. Of course, you should know if someone asks you to write a migration from scratch, which is definitely fair game for a project reviewer. Be sure that you do know how to do that. But again, as we move forward through the program, we'll see that there are lots more shortcuts to things so that we can code faster, we can build our applications faster. And then I can just run, of course, rake db migrate. My schema will pop up, and I'll have my spells model, my spells table. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So now if I hit Tux, I'll begin a pry session essentially. This is my console. And I can make a first spell. And I think the first spell that everyone knows, I don't know how to spell it. This is going to be funny. Leviosa. And the description. What?
That looked right.
Yeah, the Harry Potter nerds in here can tell me. Well, I guess, yeah. Description is makes things levitate, right? Okay, and then I can say spell here. Here's my instance. I can say spell.save. And again, remember, we said that we won't be writing SQL by hand, but it's not going away. In our console, we can see here what SQL was executed. We can also see what SQL is executed as we run active record methods, right? If I say spell, select spells, remember this asterisk here from the table spells. So as we move forward, you'll see in the Tux console, as well as we'll look at the Sinatra log today when we run shotgun, and you'll be able to see the SQL processes still taking place. Okay, and then what's another spell? Booms, I think that's a good one, and that that turns on a light at the end of your wand. This is so silly. Spell2.save. Notice here that when the save runs correctly, we get a return value of true. The difference here is that we didn't have an ID before, now does have an ID. So I have 2 spells in my database. Pretty straightforward, right? Any questions? All right, so I wonder, can I play this without making it screen? I'm gonna go full screen. Okay, well, I'll just try to hide this as much as possible. All right, so today we're gonna talk about HTTP verbs in CRUD. So if you remember from our last application that I made, basically whenever you type something into your browser, right, and you press enter, if we're going to google.com and we press enter, we're making a GET request, right? There are other types of requests that can be made. In fact, when we're using applications like Sinatra, there are 5. So there are GET requests, which again are the most common requests that are made through the browser when we're typing something into the URL bar. And that corresponds with a read action. We're gonna get some information back. We're just gonna see something there, right? When we make that request to the server, to the controller action, the model, if there is one, is just going to send back some information for us to see. GET requests always respond with just visualizing information. POST requests aren't immediately visible to the browser. In fact, they're most significant when we're sending information to our server, to our backend, to create information, right? Put and patch both also update. These are the U, right, of CRUD. And then delete is the final one. And of course, we want to erase some information in our application. And if you don't understand these right now, you'll be using them a lot, and we'll clear them up as the lecture continues. But are there any immediate questions about the 5 HTTP verbs?
Yeah, I have a question. Sure, is there ever a reason we would ever want to use put?
I think, again, these are kind of conventions. So if you're telling yourself, if you in your application have a specific, I think for the most time, you're right, you would probably be using patch. But if you had a specific case in your application where you were just, oh, I'm so sorry. Did you say whenever you would use patch?
Put.
Change an entire row.
So yeah, rather than post, or why wouldn't you just use patch if you wanted to update it? Because you could patch everything that way, right?
Well, I think what you'll find is that we don't always know exactly what the user has changed. Usually there's a form and the user can change 3 bits of information. We don't know, right?
Right.
As you'll see later, it's like whenever you edit something, usually in an application, when you click the edit button, all of the form fields become available for you to change, right? So
Right.
how are we going to know which ones are different and which ones are the same? In general, we do put, there can be instances where it's like maybe there's a form where someone's just changing their name, or they're just
Right.
changing their username, or they're just changing their password. That would be a patch, right?
Right.
You'll find that I don't think that people, at least in my experience, it kind of just feels like splitting hairs. If the information is being, it's important to remember that these are just kind of indications of what's happening. At the end of the day, you and I are writing the code that gets executed. So there's nothing preventing us from, or I'll see if I can explain this a little bit more, but these are just kind of signals to people or people reading our code, what we expect to happen. But at the end of the day, we're writing the functions in our controllers, right? We're writing the methods. So it's hypothetical, and it's not following convention, but you could theoretically make a put request that actually creates an instance of something, but that's not following convention, right? The point of convention is that we use specific keywords to communicate what we're trying to accomplish. So you'll see a little bit more about what I mean in a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions before I continue?
I had a question.
Yeah, what's up, Jesse?
Yesterday, I found myself, I was doing a delete function.
Sure.
And then in the in the ERB file, the only way that I could get the test to pass was so that in the method with the HTML code, the method had to be a post. And I found it like different. I guess I was like confused as to why could it not just be delete for the method, and then it just syncs.
In the ERB form?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is a great question and something I was going to touch on later, but we can talk about this now. HTML only knows how to send two types of requests. Forms can only send get or post requests. Put, patch, and delete are things that were kind of invented to follow this RESTful routing convention. And so basically what I'm saying is like the people who built HTML and the people who this pattern that we're following, the RESTful routing convention pattern, aren't really, well, they're different groups of people, right? The RESTful routing convention people didn't say, hey, people who are in charge of HTML, we came up with these concepts that we think are really important. Would you mind creating put, patch, and delete as methods that forms can understand? That doesn't happen, right? So what you'll see that we have to do later is we have to kind of create an override method, where we'll use something that Sinatra provides called, it's the rack middleware. We have to have that extra parameter on our form that specifies if we're trying to make a put, patch, or delete method instead. And what Sinatra will do is check to see if that parameter is there. And if there is a parameter that has, it's called, you'll see later, it's underscore method, right?
Yeah.
If that key exists in the parameter hash, it'll say, okay, so the user doesn't want what was indicated to actually go through. We're going to use the HTTP verb that they specified in the tertiary parameter, which we'll get to later. But the takeaway point is that the people who constructed or built HTML only made forms capable of sending get and post requests. If we use anything beside a get or a post request, we have to use our rack override method to have our information hit the correct method in our controller. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, straightforward. So
you'll see that. Go ahead.
No, yeah. So what you're saying, the middleware is just to compensate for the lack of additional methods.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Okay. So here we have a RESTful credit story, passive characters. I think my friend Dick came up with this. It's kind of funny. But we're going to be kind of telling the story of RESTful routing through this kind of dining scenario. So we have the user, who is the customer, and then we have the controller, who is the waiter, and then the model is the chef in a way. The model, the chef, is aware of everything, all of the ingredients, all of the recipes, every item that's on the menu. The controller can make the model what the user wants to see, and then the user is person navigating the browser, right? So we're going to kind of go through these one at a time, and then as we go through them, we'll build them out in our application. So a cruddy story, notable props. So here's the view. You can imagine that the menu is kind of the view, or the table is kind of the view, I guess, is what this is trying to communicate. And the user's sitting down at the table, and the user says, I want to see a menu of all the sushi I can order. So let's take a second here to think about, we're going to try to fill in the gaps. So the HTTP verb, if a user wants to see everything, is going to be one of these things. Can anyone tell me which HTTP verb? Right, Rikshan is right. This is a get request. This is going to be a get request. We're going to be using the get verb, right? To access the correct view.
To get the menu, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think there's one piece that I'm kind of forgetting, but we'll see if we can get there. I guess I'll do this really quick over here. So the RESTful routing conventions. It says, so there are, okay, right. Okay, so the one thing that I'm realizing that the slide is missing is the view that corresponds with the CRUD action, right? So if we want to see everything, or like see all instances of a model, this is called X. The view is the index. If we want to see one instance of a model, the view is called show. If we want to see the form to create a new instance, the view is called the new. If we want to see the form to edit an instance, this view is called edit, right? And then there are some conventions that go with them. So let's say, for example, we're working with spells right now, right? So the route would be /spells, right? So it'd be like spellcaster.com/spells, right? The route would, for just to see one, would be spellcaster.com/spells, and then we would have a unique ID here. So if it's the first spell, second spell, 500th spell, right? If we want to see the form to create a new instance, the route would be spellcaster.com/spells/new, right? We want to make a new spell. And then if we were to if we wanted to edit an instance of a spell, the route would be spellcaster.com/spells/the unique ID of the spell, and then the edit form. So all of these correspond with get HTTP verb. And they all correspond with the they all correspond with the get verb because they all show information. The index view shows all instances of the model. So yeah, the index shows all instances of the model. The show view shows one instance of the model. right? The new view shows the form itself. It's just showing the form. And the edit also shows the form. The difference between the two forms is that one is to create a new instance and one is to edit a new instance. So these are all of the routes and all of the views that correspond with the get verb. Now, there are two bits of information that ultimately need to be sent somewhere, right? Once we filled out the form to, create a new instance of a model, we need to submit that information somewhere, right? So once we submit the form to create a new instance, the verb, can anyone tell me what the HTTP verb is to submit information? Exactly right, it's post. There is no view, right? There is no view that the user sees in the browser to indicate that, or to kind of demonstrate the process of creating a new instance in the table. Instead, once the method has completed, once we've successfully created the new instance and our controller says so, we actually reroute. And we reroute to the show page of that instance we just created. So we reroute to the show page of the instance we just created, right? Same thing with the edit. Submit the form to the instance. The verb can either be put or patch, as we've seen. There is no view. We reroute again to the show page of the instance we just edited.
Hey, so
and then go ahead.
Sorry, on that note, like the rerouting, essentially whenever we are doing something that doesn't require a get verb, eventually we will want to reroute it so that it does go to a get. Like we don't want any of our posts or anything showing up. Okay.
Exactly. So that's exactly right, Nelson, right? After we complete an action, or once we've completed logic that is not a get verb, it eventually results in being redirected. You can kind of think of it this way. Whenever you want the user to see something, it's generally going to be the get HTTP verb. So when a user submits a form and it makes a post request to our backend, our application is running the SQL to input the information from the form into our database, right? But the user isn't seeing that process happening. However, once the server comes back and says, we've created that instance, it is now in your table, we want to redirect them to the show page for that new instance that we created, which ultimately takes them here. So it's a back-to-back, back-to-back requests. We're initially making a post request, and then the server triggers a get request to that new URL for the show page of the instance that we just made. And then of course the weird one, and we'll talk about why delete is weird. Delete is weird because there's generally never a form that is specifically for deleting. Usually when you click on the edit page for something, there's usually a delete button there. Or even when you're looking at the show page of something, there's a delete button. I think that the people who kind of created the RESTful routing conventions, I don't know, maybe they have something to say about it. But when we delete an instance, the verb is of course going to be delete. And then when we reroute, because there is no view for the individual instance that we just deleted, we actually reroute back to the index. Okay, So I feel like this is a little bit confusing because this is a little bit confusing because I'm working with this thing here, but then we're going to go build spells. But maybe it's good that we're working with a couple different models. Oops, I skipped too far ahead. Okay, so if the verb is get, the URI is also like the URL, which I kind of just gave away, is sushis, right? Remember that this guy sitting at the table, he's like, I want to see all of the sushis. Well, that's a get request to the sushis URI, right? And then as we saw in our previous application, we write these kinds of methods in here to that the controller works as a switchboard, and it says, well, once I get a request with this HTTP verb and this URL, this is the action that I should complete, right? So in this case, if we're making a get request to the sushis, then in our Sinatra controller, the controller method is going to look like get/sushis, right? Or in our case, it's going to be get/spells. And then this fourth column here, ERB or redirect, means do we want to show the user a view or do we want to redirect them, right? Which is what I had just said. And then the final answer here is, of course, we want to take them to the index page for all of the sushis. I know this is a lot of information. We're going to do this with this really quick. I keep saying my internet is unstable. Am I okay?
You're a little choppy, but we can hear you.
Yeah, that sucks. Okay. All right, so we have our spell model. Don't need to put anything here. And then in my views, I want to make a, well, okay, well, let's do this first. So I'm going to make a controller. Yeah, I'll do spells controller. And class spells controller inherits from application controller. Oops, I forgot to put .rp. Class spells controller. And then remember, whenever you create a controller, you have to go down into your config.ru file and say use spells controller. And then here, I want to make a route that when visited shows the user all of my spells. So I'm going to say get to /spells do. And then all of the logic is going to go in here. In my views, I'm also going to create a folder for my spells. And remember that the view for a spell, or for the index of the spells, is going to be our index. So all of the code is going to go in here to show my spells. All right, well, remember, I'm the coder, so I'm in control of my logic. And Jesse, this is kind of what or not Jesse, Nelson, this is kind of what I meant earlier. We've made a get request to spells, and the user is expecting to see all spell instances, right? But of course, nothing is preventing me from creating a new spell and maybe using a faker gem to create a weird name for a spell here. That was kind of the weird point that I was saying, is like, these are just conventions that we follow. But at the end of the day, we're the coders and we decide what happens within the methods. A note that I'll make here, and I'll try to consistently make throughout the rest of this week, is that it's important to familiarize yourself with what conventions expect you to do. The conventions are really rigid set of rules and a set of expectations to kind of follow in order to make applications that do very specific, and to me, you know, I wouldn't say like really fun things, right? We're really limited to these 5 HTTP verbs, these 5 methods. We can show an index of all of our model, we can show an individual of our model, we can edit, we can create a new one, or we can delete it. I think that these are pretty fundamental, but day to day, you and I, we probably work on applications that have more diverse views than this, right? You can probably go to an application that says like, look at the top 10 photos of the day. Or, you know, maybe like I was saying earlier, we just want you to edit your password. We don't want you to edit your username. Or maybe you can't go back and change your birthday or something like this. I think so. The point that I'm trying to make is get really familiar with what the goal or what each conventional method or route wants you to do specifically, and make sure that if you're using the conventional routing system, that's what's taking place in that method. And as soon as you find yourself wanting to implement a feature that does not follow the RESTful routing convention, I encourage you to, as we'll see maybe tomorrow, create your own route, create your own logic. Use the conventional RESTful routing methods, use these guys to just do what they were meant to do. If that doesn't make sense right now, it's okay. We're still talking about the basics. Okay, so remember that I eventually am going to want to pass some information from my controller to my view, and that's going to happen via an instance variable. So I'm going to call the instance variable spells, and I'm going to say that I want all of the spells inside of this instance variable, right? And then on my last line of code, I'm going to specify which view I want to ultimately render to the user. And that's going to be inside of, remember that in the application controller, it specified that the views are app/views. And then if we need to go a little bit further, we can do that in here and say spells index. I wonder if I can just do this. ERB, oops, I did it wrong. ERB, I don't remember off the top of my head if I'm doing this right. ERB, welcome. I think I have to do it like this. Wow, I don't remember.
Yeah, I think you need the quotes.
Like that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, this looks right. All right, so then in here, I can use my handy dandy ERB to grab hold of that instance variable. Remember that when you do not use the equal sign, you are writing logic that we do not want the user to see. And that when we do use the equal sign, we can demonstrate data to the user. Oops. Maybe I'll do like a and remember, you can also have done something like each with index or something to kind of enumerate them. But I'll just leave this here for now. And then let's open up Shotgun. And let's go see if this works. No, you can just say ERB. I think that it will infer. I think that it infers that it's an HTML file as well. This is just a little bit more explicit, but yeah, it'll work either way. Okay, so if I go to slash spells, let's see if this works. Let's see, what am I doing? Okay, well, we'll use this as a learning opportunity, right? The first thing that I kind of want to show you is that the application is going to log all of the requests that receive to it, and you can always check out here to see what's going on. So let's see, ERB spells index, no such file or directory, apps view spells index. Okay, so it actually is expecting me to just say, I think unless I specified maybe here, let's see, index.html.erb. And .html. Okay, so yeah, I guess I thought that was something that we did before.
I think if you put .html.
Also,
so
I think you need your instance variable spells and then spell. I don't know if that affected it in the other.
Oh, did I say spells?
Yeah.
Aha, thank you. Okay, cool. Here we go. Awesome. Cool. And then maybe I should do like a break in between here, right? Here we go. And then up here in an H1 tab, all my spells. Cool. So to revisit, I made a GET request to /spells, right? The controller identified that I had made a GET request to this URL, right? I wrote the logic to retrieve all of the spell instances in my database and save them to an instance variable. And then I provided the correct ERB, the correct view, where the instance variable became available, and I was able to use it to dynamically demonstrate all of the spells that I currently have. And of course, because we're using the iterator, we can continue to add spells and they will appear accordingly underneath. Are there any questions about this one? So you can really see our MVC, the MVC model in action, right? I'm the user, I'm making a request to /spells. The controller inside of the controller is saying, okay, go to the model, get all the spells, render this view, and then it ultimately returns to the user in the browser. Sweet. No questions? Okay, so the next one that we'll do, we'll continue here. The controller, again, to kind of complete this, goes to the model and says, can I get all of the sushis that we serve? The model goes and selects all of the sushis in the database and then returns them to the controller, and the controller with the correct view displays them to the user in the menu, right? And then the user says, nice, I think I want the salmon roll, right? So in this case, the user is seeing sushi and then saying, I just want this one in particular, right? So which HTTP verb I'm going to use to get just one instance of a sushi? Get, that's right, okay. And then when we're doing the spells here, I'll kind of just spell this out as well. All right, get, oops, why is it going on? Did anyone not see what the URI is? Yes, the chef fires you. So what is the route that we would go to get all of the sushis? Or sorry, to get one sushi. Right. It's going to be the dynamic route of /id. In this case, for the spells, it's going to be /spells.id. And this is really interesting because although this is a string, Sinatra is going to identify that anything with a colon in front of it is going to be a placeholder. For now, we just use the ID, but as you'll see, we can really kind of make this whatever we want. Imagine that instead of having in here spellcaster, spells/1, I wanted it to be Wingardium Leviosa like this, or like this, or just like this. You really have the power. This is a variable. This is a wildcard. You can put whatever you want here, as long as inside of the method you have the correct logic that is going to take the user to where they expect to go. But for the purposes of introducing this to you all, I think the easiest way to do it is just okay, and that ultimately results in our controller method, which is get/sushi/id, which we're doing here is get/spells/id. And then, does anyone know what the name of the view is? It's show, exactly. So we'll do spells/show. That's going to be the ERB that gets resulted, and then we'll write the specific information. That spell is just going to use the find method from active record. And then let's see. Let's see what I can do. Yeah, so I'll just use this as an opportunity to, are we on Bybug or are we still on Binding Pray? We're still in Pray, okay. So I'll just put a pry in here so I can show you what happens. So when we make a request to this URL, for example, here we are in my pry session. What comes through is an object called params, right? Params is just a hash. And params just takes a bit of information that we specified using this colon here and puts it inside of the parameters as whatever we named it, right? So the key here is called ID because in the URL, we specified that it was an ID. We can also say, you can really kind of create as many parameters as you want. Name which, and I don't think that this is very practical, but just to show you. Oops, why did I try to save that? Our params hash now has 3 keys, 3 values. The key is the name that we give it in the URL. And then the value is, of course, whatever we put there when we actually typed it in. But in this case, we just want the we just want to find a spell by its ID. So we will use the ID key in the params to find the spell that we want. Remember that find automatically or expects the argument of an ID unless you specify find by something like this. If we were looking for something besides the ID. If you do find by and then put ID, I'm just going to tell you to just find and pass the ID in. Okay. So of course, we don't have a view for show. I think that as a side note, the Sinatra error messages are extremely helpful and I would really, really encourage you to use them. Here is definitely going to be the focus of where I would encourage you to look first. In the backtrace, it'll tell you exactly where the error appears to be happening. And then I think that kind of my favorite thing to look at that I think students neglect to look at is if you go all the way down to the bottom, it'll tell you what the params are and what the root was. And I find that a lot of times students are working on an error, on a bug that they have, that they think is in a specific controller action or because of a specific URL. And I always encourage them to go down here and say, well, what route did the application actually register? Because sometimes it's different than what you think. Cool. All right, so really quickly, I'll just go and make this show ERB. I need to do that. I decide to do it later. And then okay. So if I go to spell/1 now, I should get this. All right, so let's talk about really quickly is if we want to get from here to you know, I should be able to click on the names of my spells. So let's go back to our view really quick, and we're going to use our ERB to. We don't need the description anymore because the descriptions is what we're going to see in the show page. Maybe I'll say each with index to spell index. Does the index, I think the index goes second, right? Say index, and then, oops, what did I do? Spells, syntax error, unexpected. Oh. What am I doing? String can't be twice an integer. Oh, right. It's because I need to do, I need to interpolate it. Oh. And okay. So I want to be able to click on this and it take me to the show page for my spell. And all I need to do is make it an A tag, right? I can write ERB inside of other HTML. So I will say href. Let's see. Slash. Href. What's happening? Slash. Spell.id. Did someone message me? Yeah, there we go. Slash spells. Slash spell.id. Okay. And then if I click it, it will take me to the spell. Sweet. I forget which package I'm using. I think it's called ERB helper. Packages/ERB helper. Yep. All right, everybody. We will continue with the rest of CRUD tomorrow. Thank you for joining, and we'll talk to you later. Have a good day.